A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Welcome to another edition of Bearing Arms, Cam and Company. My name is Cam Edwards. Glad you're with me on the program today. We're going to be taking a look. I mean, it's amazing to me. 2024 has just flown by, but we are just a couple of weeks away from the start of the 2025 legislative sessions in state houses around the country. You've got the new session of Congress coming with Republicans in control of both the House and the Senate. And of course, gun owners have high hopes for what that means for our Second Amendment rights, right? We want to see things like right to carry reciprocity get to President Donald Trump's desk. We want to see an end to the calls for a ban on semi-automatic firearms, federal red flag laws, universal background checks, magazine bans, all the stuff we've been hearing from Joe Biden over the past 4 years. But again, it's not just at the federal level, right? There's going to be a lot of activity taking place at the state level, both good and bad. We know that those blue states where the anti-gunners still have sway are going to be very, very active in going after our right to keep and bear arms, not just through legislation, but through litigation, right? Like the lawsuits, I should say, we've seen filed by Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison, New Jersey's Matthew Platkin against gunmaker Glock, echoing the city of Chicago's lawsuit against the gun maker. We're going to see more of those activities too, right? But in red states, in places that are Second Amendment friendly, I think we are also going to see more progress being made. Now, when it comes to things like constitutional carry, I think that we've unfortunately kind of hit our limit at 29 states. North Carolina could have and should have gotten it done while the Republicans had a supermajority so they could override Governor Roy Cooper's veto. They did not, and they've lost that supermajority. So it's going to be tough for North Carolina to get constitutional carry in the books. And then you just look around the rest of the country. There aren't a lot of states where I think we've got the numbers to advance constitutional carry. But what about those states where constitutional carry is already in place? What do you do if you are a lawmaker who wants to make good laws in a state that already has pretty good laws when it comes to the Second Amendment? Well, in the show me state of Missouri, there are a couple of lawmakers who want to make it easier to legally possess and use suppressors. That's right. Representative-elect Mike Koslow, Republican from Darden Prairie, and State Senator Nick Schroer, Republican from Defiance, Missouri, have introduced legislation, according to the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, that would stop the prosecution of the state-level offense of possessing or selling a suppressor. The measure would also attempt to shield silencers made in Missouri from federal prosecution. Koslow said the measure designed to help prevent hearing loss among hunters and other gun enthusiasts. He says these are basically hearing protection. I have a lot of friends who have hearing trouble. Now, as you can imagine, the very high-profile shooting of United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson, in which a illegal suppressor or a suppressor was illegally used. We don't know how that suppressor was obtained, but I don't think it was obtained legally. In fact, it may have been manufactured, a home-built suppressor, like the home-built gun that the alleged perpetrator used in the attack on the United Healthcare CEO. This is raising all kinds of questions, at least in the local media in Missouri, about why these Republicans will be trying to make suppressors easier to acquire. Also told the St. Louis Post-Dispatch that he hopes the event doesn't torpedo his proposal. He says, I can understand why optics would say this is bad timing, but it would have been the same outcome whether he had used a suppressor or not. Absolutely. It would have been the same outcome if he had used a legally purchased handgun. And by the way, there was nothing preventing the accused killer of the United Healthcare CEO from legally purchasing a firearm. It was not a prohibited person. May have been trying to cover his tracks. But again, we saw how well that worked out, right? St. Louis Post-Dispatch also spoke to gun control advocates who, as you can imagine, are not keen about Koslow's proposal. Every Town for Gun Safety and other groups say putting silencers in the wrong hands could create serious public safety risks. Using proper ear protection is a better way to ensure hearing isn't lost from the sound of gunfire. Silencers are not a hearing protection issue, the organization said. Well, yeah, they are. Now, ideally, I would say that the best way to protect your hearing is both through, either cans on your head, even just, foam stuck into your ears, as well as the use of suppressors. But yes, suppressors are a hearing issue. Not only that, I would say that they are a good neighbor issue. In fact, Koslow said that he hunts deer with a suppressor. He says he prefers that to wearing earmuffs because he likes to enjoy the sounds of nature. He said that increased use of suppressors could also lower sound levels for people living or hiking near shooting ranges. And how often have we seen this over the years, right? Where, not talking about an inside range, right? But in rural areas, either somebody wants to shoot on their own property, or a individual or an entity wants to establish an outdoor gun range, or even an existing range that has been around for decades, all of a sudden comes under fire from, new neighbors who say, I don't like the sound of this gunshots. It bothers me. Every weekend I hear bang, 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 bang. I can tell you, I'm not one of those people. I love it when my neighbors are shooting. To me, that's the sound of freedom. However, I'm probably not in the majority. And I can say, even as much as I enjoy the sound of gunfire from my neighbors, knowing that they're shooting safely and responsibly on their own property, one of my dogs absolutely hates it, is terrified of loud noises, and shakes and shivers and really freaks out when especially this time of year. We've got deer hunters all around. And we can get some gunshots pretty close to our property line. And it's miserable for her. Absolutely miserable. Same with the 4th of July and fireworks, but that's a different issue entirely. It is a good neighbor issue. Now, again, the use of suppressors doesn't negate the sound entirely, right? It drops the decibel level down about 30 decibels. But it's still, generally speaking, about 80 to 90 decibels. So you can still hear a suppressed firearm. It is just not as loud. It is not as deep a sound. It's not the big boom that you will sometimes hear. And I think it is at least somewhat beneficial, not just for the gun owner themselves, but again, for neighbors, for people in the surrounding area. It is less of an annoyance if you find that sound annoying. But again, according to the anti-gunners at Everytown, silencers are not a hearing protection issue. Yeah, they really are. Now, there is an interesting quirk about the bill that was introduced by Koslow. St. Louis Post-Dispatch says, rather than immediately go into effect if signed into law, the measure directs the state attorney general to ask a federal judge if the measure is constitutional before Missouri companies begin manufacturing suppressors. We've seen, legislation and even laws passed in other states, let's say over the past decade or so. I think Montana did this. Kansas did this. It's typically called like the Firearm Freedom Act, right? Which basically says, if a gun is manufactured in a particular state, it doesn't leave that state in terms of commerce. There's no interstate commerce, right? That the federal gun laws do not apply to that particular firearm. The federal courts have not been kind to those laws, to put it bluntly. So Koslow, I think, may run into that same issue if he wants a federal judge to say a Missouri manufactured suppressor that does not leave the state of Missouri, is not subject to the provisions of the National Firearms Act. That might be a stretch. But again, taking the state prohibitions against suppressors off the table would mean that it would be up to the federal government, again, to prosecute violations of the NFA. We'll see what the future holds for this particular measure, but as the Post-Dispatch writes, that this is just one of a number of gun-related bills, both good and bad, that are expected to percolate in the General Assembly starting next month. In the House, the paper says Republicans have filed a number of gun rights bills, including a measure that would ban banks from using credit card codes to determine if somebody has purchased a firearm. It's not even that, by the way. It's the use of these category-specific codes for gun stores. It doesn't allow law enforcement or your bank or anybody else to figure out, oh, Cam just bought a gun. They can figure out, oh, Cam just spent $80 or $800 at a gun store. But the use of that code doesn't allow anybody to peer into your cart, which is one of the reasons why so many credit card companies have said this is not a way to fight violent crime or to identify a criminal who's planning something nefarious before the fact, right? The gun control groups say, oh, no. If there's a suspicious purchase that's made, then that can be flagged by the bank. The bank can alert law enforcement, and then they can swoop in and grab that individual before they have a chance to carry out the attack. But how do you identify a suspicious purchase? Somebody could, with murder on their mind, could buy a single firearm and a box of ammunition. How do you know that that person has nefarious intent? Somebody could spend several $1,000s at a gun store. But it doesn't mean that they're acquiring an arsenal for illicit means. It could be acquiring, let's say, just a pricey handgun or a pricey rifle or maybe a lot of ammunition or maybe a canoe and some other accessories, right? There's no way of knowing, which is one of the reasons why the use of these codes is such a bad idea. So I'm glad to see that that is actually under consideration in the Show Me State of Missouri. Post-Dispatch says other GOP-sponsored proposals include banning red flag laws, which would be a very good thing. Democrats, who are in the minority in both chambers, have filed a number of gun control bills, including a ban on the sale of certain rifles to people younger than 21, and universal background checks for gun purchases. Those certain rifles, by the way, would be semi-automatic rifles, the rifles that the gun control advocates have deemed to be assault weapons. Yeah, so Missouri, again, going to be a busy state. I think a lot of states are going to be pretty busy with the gun control issue and protecting our Second Amendment rights, depending on what state we're talking about here. But we will eagerly await and see what the future holds for this bill that attempts to make it a little bit easier for Missourians to exercise their right to own, possess, and use a suppressor going forward. All right, now to today's armed citizen story, our good deed of the day and our recidivist report. We will start there with a case out of Lancaster, Pennsylvania. This is unbelievable to me, not in a good way. Lancaster teen pleads guilty after firing shots into a house. Okay, so that's the headline here. Here's what happened. 17-year-old Javon Taylor, according to the Lancaster County District Attorney, fired a gun through the first floor window of a home in August of 2023. There were people inside the home at the time. There were 2 adults. There were 4 children. Thankfully, nobody was hurt. Taylor, it doesn't sound like the brightest bulb in the chandelier, recorded him firing a shot into the home on FaceTime. Yeah, so it was pretty easy for investigators to determine who fired the shot. Prosecutors had pretty strong evidence to bring against Javon Taylor, which may account for his guilty plea. All right? But it's the sentence that's the problem here. Because according to WGAL, Taylor will spend the next 14 months on parole, followed by 4 years of probation. In other words, the only time that Javon Taylor will spend behind bars for firing a shot into an occupied home is the time that he spent awaiting trial and ultimately his plea bargain. That's it. Now listen, 17-year-old, should he spend the rest of his life behind bars for this crime? No. But this was a serious incident. It is really luck and happenstance that nobody was injured from the shot that was fired, or multiple shots, I guess, into this occupied home. And instead of having to face real and serious consequences for his real and serious actions, Taylor's walking away with a slap on the wrist. And I cannot help but believe that he may get the impression that the criminal justice system doesn't care much about what he does, and that he can go on to commit more serious crimes in the future without paying a price. Today's armed citizen story from Phoenix, Arizona, where police say a homeowner shot an armed suspect during a home invasion that involved multiple intruders. And we don't have a lot of information about what happened here. It was about 1 a.m. on Monday. Police responded to the scene in South Phoenix on a shots fired call. Person who called 911 indicated that there were several people inside the home who were armed. When officers arrived on the scene, they found an individual outside of the residence with at least one gunshot wound. He was taken to a nearby hospital with serious injuries. No other injuries were reported. According to Phoenix police, their initial investigation showed several armed suspects forced their way inside the home. One of the men living in the house was able to retrieve a gun of his own and fired at these suspects, hitting the man who was found with gunshot wounds. Once the defensive fire took place, the other suspects ran from the scene on foot. No other suspect has been identified. In fact, police have not released the identity of the wounded suspect who was taken to the local hospital. But again, thankfully, no injuries to the homeowner, no injuries to any of the other residents. And according to police, no charges filed against that homeowner. So again, we'll keep our eyes out for any more information. But right now, this appears to be a pretty clear-cut case of self-defense there in the Phoenix area. Finally today, our good deed of the day, in the right place, at the right time, willing and able to do the right thing, a Good Samaritan who has yet to be identified, who helped save a crash victim in Eugene, Oregon, I guess it was about a month ago. It was November 16th. Eugene Police Department says it was about 11 o'clock in the morning on that Saturday when Deputy Chief Sean Adams, who was coming back from a work-related conference, came upon the scene of a head-on collision. And he immediately started providing emergency aid to one of the drivers that was involved. There was an ER nurse who showed up at the scene. She identified herself as Michaela. They're not sure how she spells her name, but that's what she said her name was. Adam says, as we began the care for the driver, there's a moment of conversation between Michaela and I to determine who has the higher level of training and who's in the best position to provide the primary care. And that's how I learned Michaela's name and the fact that she's an ER nurse. So she helped treat this individual there at the scene, helped to maybe save the driver's life, according to Adams. But they don't know who she is. She left when the emergency personnel arrived, didn't give her name to police or anything like that. And Adams says Michaela was amazing. At a minimum, I know her efforts positively impacted this driver, and she needs to be recognized for the skill, the effort, and compassion that she displayed for the 30 or so minutes that we were inside this crushed Prius while the firefighters were cutting the roof off of the car. So they're asking anybody in the Eugene, Oregon area who knows a nurse named Michaela or Michaela herself to come forward just so that they can recognize her for her quick thinking, her swift actions that, again, may very well have saved a life. Now, not every Good Samaritan wants to be identified, right? There are some folks who say, that's not why I did it. Don't want the attention. I'm a private person. Glad that it turned out well, but I don't want this recognition. And maybe that's the case for Michaela. But either way, her actions should be recognized. And I'm glad that the deputy chief there is speaking out about what she did, even if we don't know exactly who she is. All right, that is going to do it for this edition of Bearing Arms Cam and Company. Just a couple of program notes for you. I am going to be on a regularly scheduled vacation for the next week. I don't know. Honestly, I don't know how much of a vacation is going to be, but I'm going to be off, regularly scheduled away until December 26th. I'll be back next Thursday. So if you don't see a Cam and Company for the next week, it doesn't mean anything terrible. Just means that I'm not around here, but certainly going to still be paying very close attention to what's going on with Miss E. The TMI update today is basically more of the same. She is still in the hospital. We're hoping that she gets out here soon. Not really prepared to talk about what the next steps are, but I will say that your thoughts and your prayers, again, are greatly appreciated. And I've heard from a lot of folks over the past week. Miss E has as well. And I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for all of the support that you've given us, not just now in this immediate situation, but really over the past 8.5 years since her initial cancer diagnosis. The love and support that we have received from so many folks. It is literally overwhelming to think about at times. But again, it is so greatly appreciated. And I just can't thank you enough. So please continue to keep her in your thoughts and your prayers. She is still feeling positive. She is optimistic. She is making lots of friends with the doctors and the nurses. And again, hopefully she gets to come home soon. We'll give you any updates as we can when we're back next Thursday. Next Wednesday is going to be Christmas. So I'll see you next Thursday, and hopefully we'll have some good news to report. But make sure you're checking out BarianArms.com throughout the week that I'm away. Tom Knighton, John Petrolino, Ranjit Singh, going to be keeping you up to date on all the latest Second Amendment news and information. I may, if I have the opportunity, pop in and write a story or two, but no guarantees. But I know that we'll keep you covered again on all of the big news regarding your right to keep and bear arms over the next week. I hope that you have a very Merry Christmas. I won't wish you a Happy New Year because I'll be back before then. But again, thank you so much for everything. It means the world to Miss E and myself. And look forward to seeing you soon. Until then, be well, be safe, and be free.